Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and to our web audience, and to Philip, who just walked in. So we are here in a very volatile year that is unfolding before our eyes. For whatever reason, maybe that's the way I'm wired, but I always am cognizant and try to pay attention to what we call connecting the dots. You know, when you live in a moment, you only see the immediate here and now. When you climb up on a mountain, you see the horizon, you see the bigger picture. I always think about 1911, exactly 100 years ago, and no one had a clue what was coming in that century. By no means am I trying to compare, God forbid, anything close to what happened last century, but the most important thing is that there's an unknown element. But yet the seeds are all there. Because anything that happened after 1911 the seeds were sowed. The seeds of discontent, the seeds of revolution, of transition. And today, perhaps even more so, especially as I've mentioned many times, technology accelerates everything and amplifies everything. And then suddenly, in this year 2011, which is 11 years into the new century, there is a flurry of events that are very clearly not momentary ones. So true, the first year in the 21st century, 2001, almost like a welcoming, a rude awakening or a rude welcoming to the new century, September 11th took place. And now 10 years later, many things have happened, financially, technologically, but it's critical to always know that we're in transition. And the wise people that have the ability, as it says, Ezur Chacham Haroya Sanoilad, which means who is the wise person? The person who sees the birthing. The word nolad in Hebrew means that which is born, that which will be born, the birthing. Now why does that signify a wise person? Because most of us look at the symptoms. We look at the moment. And we don't necessarily see what it will give birth to. But the wise person doesn't just look at what's now, but looks at what will come out of it. Now you may say, well, many of us are quite aware of consequences of our behavior. But nevertheless, wisdom isn't just being aware, wisdom is acting on it. Many of us are aware and we do exactly the wrong thing, even though we're aware. Which just makes even question whether you are maybe more insane than you think you are. Because if one thing you don't see, or you've never been burned before, it's one thing. But if you've been burned and time and again, and you know that the likelihood is that this cause will create that effect, you put your hand in fire and it gets burned the first time, it's one thing. Second time. But if you know that's what happens, and you know that's the birthing, you don't act on it, it's not very wise. But what happens? Our emotions get the better of us, obviously. And when the emotions get the better, the emotions tend to cloud the bigger picture. Emotions look at the moment. They work by impulse. The mind, at its best, works by reflection. It reflects, thinks about things, pauses. Now, purely having a mind without a heart, obviously, is also not healthy. Then you remain detached, you remain cerebral, you remain always on the fence, perhaps, because there's always risks. So the real beautiful combination of a healthy person, a secure person, is using the mind at its full strength to analyze and research and reflect. But then once, so to speak, your mind has cleared the path, then you allow your heart to enter at lesser risk and allow yourself to emotionally experience something. So Ezur Chacham Harayas Hanelad, who is the wise person, the one who sees the birthing. In Hasidic thought, the Noilad also sometimes refers to one of the classic and most powerful teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, and that is the concept of perpetual creation. That even though when we look with our naked eyes and with our naked senses, we see an inanimate universe, which means if we were to imagine this room without people in it, it's an inanimate room, chairs, tables, walls. In truth is, we know today that it's brimming with energy of all forms, atomic energy, nuclear energy, subatomic energy. So the same is true as the Baal Shem Tov says that Hamachadish B'tuvei B'chol Yom Tamid Ma'aseh Bereishis, we say in every daily prayer, that he renews, God that is, the creation every second anew. And in the second section of Tanya, the classic work of Chabad Hasidus, sometimes called the Bible of Hasidic thought, the second section, second book of the 5 books in that book of Tanya, it's called Shar Yichud V'Amunah, the gate of unity and faith. He begins and opens up with this teaching of the Baal Shem Tov and elaborates on the concept of perpetual creation. That every second, virtually, every moment, all of existence is renewed from the beginning, as if it didn't exist before. That includes us. That includes everything that you see, everything you know. So why then does it look old? Why does it look like it was pre-existing? Because it's called, in Hasidic thought, Chidush Hayeshenut, Hayeshonus. Chidush Hayeshenus. Which means it's renewed in a way based on what existed a moment before. So though it's a constant renewal, just like electricity going into an appliance, running into an appliance is constantly renewing it. You shut off the electricity, the appliance stops working, but it's still energizing the same appliance as a moment before. So we're not renewed where we're born every moment as if we were one day old, 1 second old. We're renewed as you are right now. If you're 20 years old, 22 years old, anybody older than that here? Nobody looks much older. So you're renewed as if you are 22, 23, or whatever it is. But never think that that means there's less renewal. It just means it's already a gift. God is saying I'm not just renewing you, I'm also giving you the experience and memory of what happened a moment before. Because imagine if we were really renewed, we'd constantly make new mistakes again because we would not remember what we did yesterday. So here we have the benefit of the best of both worlds. You have your past, even though I know some people would like to erase it, but you have your past and all things you learn from it, but you also have the power to renew. That means you're not trapped by your past. That's the power of this concept of Chidush Yeshenus. So it's new, but it's within the parameters that exist. And those that get in touch with that current, with that source of energy, have the power to dance and sing all the time. The power of constant joy, inner peace, knowing that we're not victims of circumstances and nothing from the past can trap you. Because you have that access to a renewed source of energy all the time. We call it renewable energy, recyclable energy. So Chacham Reyes Hanel means the wise person, not only does he see the outcome, the birthing of things today, what will birth, but he also sees that force that is constantly Noila, giving birth to existence. And you could say these two interpretations, both the practical, the simple one, and the deeper one, are really interdependent. Because when you understand that there's a constant source of energy, a constant will, God is willing and speaking and wanting this world to be recreated every moment, then you understand that it also gives birth to things. There's a purpose behind it all. So with that short introduction, when you look at the world and the events 2011, as I said, now suddenly it's all like exploded. So many different levels. We're only in the month of May, and we already have, beginning of this year, the big upheavals that began in the Middle East, completely unexpected, unprepared for, the billions of dollars in the CIA and gathering of intelligence in this country, did not predict any of what would come. They have all kinds of scenarios, but not this one. That suddenly the 60% people under 30 years old in the Arab world, the Muslim world, would rise. And There's no question there's much more to come, besides the fall of Egypt and Yemen, the leaders, and Tunisia, and what will be. We have no clue what will be, but clearly there's a spark has ignited in that region that affects over 1 billion people. In many ways affects all the world because we are addicted to oil. So that's the first thing. That alone is already a event, a watershed moment that, as I've discussed in previous classes, is, in my opinion, equated with any of the great revolutions, the seeds of revolution that happened in the 17th, 18th century or the 20th century. Because you're dealing with a fundamental clash within the Muslim world itself between its own modernity and faith, between autocrats, tyrants, and a population that's seeking something more. Religion and, as I said, faith and modernity, religion and secular life, and all the comforts of our life. All the forces that, if you look in history, you don't have to be very wise. See, Chacham Reyes HaNeilad is someone who sees the birthing of the future, even though it never happened. Here we have an additional benefit. We look at it in retrospect, we see what happened. You put together in one kitchen these ingredients, and you can rest assured there's going to be an explosion. And that is religion, especially passionate and even fanatic religion, modernity, technology, money, oil, tyrants, lack of free rights, and all that. I mean, the fact that nobody could gather that something will happen is because we like to live in the moment. We like to live with our heads in the sand. The ostrich effect, that they call it. And avoid these issues and say, maybe it won't happen in my time, it'll happen in the next generation. You don't think about it. But once it happens, it becomes very obvious. This wasn't like some surprise. It's not like someone suddenly was born in the Middle East and decided, okay, let's create a revolution. These are seeds. Seeds are planted. And when you see wisely what it gives birth to, you see where. And there's much to predict even in the future, which we shall try to discuss as well. And then you have, out of the blue, this great tsunami and earthquake, the reverse order, that creates this devastation in Japan. And in all the talk about nuclear energy replacing oil and so on, suddenly a nuclear reactor turns against mankind that built it. And then, even though the news may be subsided, but the deaths have not. And it has long-term effects. We don't even know with what extent. And then just recently, just last week, bin Laden's killing. Even though that per se you can say is just symbolic, but still, it captured so many minds because in many ways he represents the face of what has changed so much in our lives. Every time you go to an airport, all these security alerts, how much of our unconscious has become insecure as a result of the last 10 years of potential terror that can happen, even in this part of the world, not just in Israel and the Middle East. And you could throw more things in, of course, and I don't want to overreach. Of course, we didn't have the natural disasters now in the South, the economy. But the point is that it's all happening in a very short period of time. So if you look back the last 10 years, events have happened, but I don't recall recent memory so many major ones all happening in a certain period. So it has to get your attention. And the Baal Shem Tov teaches us another powerful concept that is also a postulate, corollary from the original concept of perpetual creation, and that is the concept of divine providence. Since existence is constantly renewed and it's not just a random thing, everything has meaning. Everything has providence. There's a meaning in it all. Which leads to a third teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, that everything we see and we hear teaches us a lesson. Everything. And one of the ways the Baal Shem Tov puts it is that even when a leaf turns over in the wind, a leaf in the wind, think of it. How many leaves are turning over in the winds right now? Even seemingly such a trivial event is part of the plan. And it shouldn't surprise us when you think about it to say, hey, 1 second, let's not take this to extremes. Well, it shouldn't surprise us, especially in our microscopic world today. We have 75 trillion cells in our body. And God forbid, one cell turns over in the wind. It's not such a good thing. You don't say, hey, there's another 74.999 trillion. Because we live in a world where size does not matter. And microscopic things have a dramatic effect. And just like computer programs, they can have millions and millions of lines of code. One extra dot or one missing dot wreaks havoc and makes the whole thing not work. That's so it's true with the cellular structure of our bodies. And it's true on a subatomic level. Look at what nuclear power is. It's about nuclear fusion or fission. Can create enormous energy. But if it gets out of control, it can wreak such havoc, destroy people. Because what it does is it attacks the inner workings of our bodies and our existence. That's what radioactivity is about. So when you go into those inner dimensions, little things make a big difference. So it shouldn't surprise us that a leaf turning in the wind, maybe to our naked eyes, we don't see much about it. But who knows what it does for the balance of things. Butterfly effect. There are things today we understand it's completely unfathomable, the whole ecosystems of how nature works and how nature even adjusts when human beings destroy its balance. Everything. You ever see how, if you ever see the studies or these shows where they show you how a forest regenerates after a forest fire. It's amazing how the fire itself turns certain things into completely, in the beginning it burns everything, it seems as destruction. And how nature has its own way of building in a place of such destruction. Sometimes things that are even more beautiful than they were in the first place. So there's a mystery to the whole existence, and we know that today. Wiser, as a chacham reyes haneled, is also this, to understand a leaf in the wind may not mean much to the naked eye, but to the wise person sees it gives a birthing to something. One thing leads to the next. Do you know the interactions you've had today, maybe casual ones with a cab driver, someone you bumped into in the street, things you think are completely insignificant? What you say or don't say can have an impact forever and ever. Most of us are not blessed to see the impact of every interaction we have. Some are. And when you see it, it's sometimes amazing. Things that, you said to somebody 20 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, for good or for bad. And an impact you wouldn't have imagined. So how much more so, how many more things are happening like that we're not aware of? So when you look at events, it's important to recognize, humbly recognize, that there's a bigger picture, there's an inside story. And there's let's call it a divine choreography. What God does not, however, choreograph is our choices. What we will do with the stage being set and the platform. How we'll react. How will we behave? That's our part. But in order for us to react well, we have to also know try to get a sense of what's going on. So in this week's chapter, we talk about the rhythm. Rhythm is a key word here. What is rhythm? Rhythm means, like anything, like a wave, is a flow. Rhythm means that you don't look at things just a moment, as a sum of the parts. But rhythm means there's a flow, there's a sequence in our lives. Whenever you look at what's the word I wanted to say? A cardiogram. When a heart is beating healthy, you see the rhythm. You could see it in the wave. It's a perfect wave. If it's not perfect, and there are too many peaks or too many valleys, or they're not consistent, there's a problem. Obviously, if it's flat, there's a very serious problem. So that alone, just by looking at that wave, tells you that life is about a rhythm. The rhythm of our breathing, exhaling and inhaling, the rhythm of our heartbeat, of our pulse. So you can imagine there's also a cosmic rhythm, there's a spiritual rhythm to life. Sometimes it's referred to as Rotze and Shuv. It's a term I've used many times here. It's a verse in the book of Ezekiel, Yecheskel. Rotze and Shuv. What's Rotze and Shuv? Rotze means to yearn and Shuv means to return. Tension and resolution is a critical part of the rhythm of a human being. Too much tension or too much resolution and there's something out of whack. A healthy person needs to have a measure of angst and tension. Not too much, or else it turns into something that's called anxiety. And a person who has too much resolution, which means they're always at peace with themselves, they never aspire, never yearn, never dream, are never restless, that's also not a healthy sign. Like the rhythm of the heart, it has to go up and it has to go down. So the perfect balance is an element of yearning, and then resolving, and then yearning more. Years ago, I tried doing this Rotzei and Shuv index. It got so complicated, it wasn't so easy. But this idea of almost mapping the coordinates of your own Rotzei and Shuv. How much yearning is going on in your life and how much resolution. And if you mapped it, for a period of time, you'd get yourself your own spiritual cardiogram. If you'd see there's a lot of yearning going on, very little resolution, it would look like a lot of peaks and it never comes down. Or vice versa, a lot of valleys without peaks. So there are ways to judge and measure the rhythm of our lives, but rhythm is critical. But most importantly is that many of us, and this is a fundamental flaw in our own self-analysis and self-introspection, don't respect and appreciate the rhythm. When things are going well, we want it to just hold on to it forever. Which is, I understand, we all love that inclination, but it's impossible. Not because good things can't continue to happen, but because life moves. Life is in flux. There's no such thing. Like, go back to the cardiogram. Imagine, the heart contracts and expands. And it does so perfectly. So it contracts and say, I just want to hold on to the contraction. It doesn't work that way. It has to expand. Or else, so it's about swimming and moving in a rhythmic way, not just holding on to the moments. But that's the nature of the human being, is because we sometimes are insecure, unhealthy in our own self-awareness. We just want to hold on to something good because I've suffered so much. Why can't I just hold on to something good forever? Instead of learning what is your rhythm, what's the way, how should you swim, how should you find balance? You look at the natural world again, whether it's the mineral, vegetable, or animal world, you'll see the rhythm is unbelievable. Like a clock. However, of course, in those worlds, there's no choice. So they never disturb. There are no such thing as dysfunctional animals, unless humans make them dysfunctional. There's no such thing as insecure lions or leopards or eagles or bluefish or whatever. They're healthy. They have their rhythm. They breed, protect their young, feed, hunt, die, and the cycle continues. But we humans were given this extra dimension that allows us to change the script for the better or for the worse. And that changes everything, because we can fall out of our rhythm due to choices, bad choices we make, and bad choices that our parents make, and bad choices that life makes, sometimes just circumstances. Now that doesn't mean you can't resolve it, it just means you have to be aware of that. So in the human equation, we have to add one key thing. To get rhythm, you also need adjustments all the time. In nature, it adjusts itself. You see this all the time. You see animals, for example. You see it all the time regarding when humans try to get rid of pests. They build up immunity to it, and then they adjust. So in the natural world, there's adjustments happening without real effort. It's just the way the world works. In human beings, adjustments have to take effort. You have to work at it. In other words, if you wander off the reservation too far, you have to do something. You're not just going to correct itself. There's no market corrections. You may have wake-up calls, and you may be given signs, and you may be given many directions, but you have to make a move. As Maimonides says in The Rhythm of Things, always choose the middle path. However, if you've gone off too far to the right, he doesn't necessarily mean politically, but too far to the right in any particular way, too kind, too giving, too spoiling yourself for others, and so on. Then the only way to get back to the middle is you have to go to the left. So if you're traveling on a road, straight, middle road, great. But if you wander off too far to the right, how do you get back to the middle without going to the left? So you need that balance. That's the adjustment. And if you go too far to the left, you need to do the same thing to go more to the right. In other words, if you're weak in one area, you need to reinforce strength in that particular area in order to readjust and rebalance your life. In many ways, when we are in this period of time, this 49 days of the Omer counting. So if you're following the book that I had the honor to prepare. So it's about readjusting, looking at something and seeing is there a balance between your love and your discipline, let's say, or between your compassion and your ambition and your humility. And each day deals with another aspect of that. It's all about looking at it, examining it, and adjusting. And then seeing the results of your adjustment, and then adjusting again if necessary. So the rhythm in human life requires a whole series of adjustments in addition to the natural rhythm. So of course you have to find that rhythm and then learn to adjust accordingly, which requires usually an objective friend that can help you, first of all, determine. Because you can convince yourself that your cardiogram looks perfect and someone with a trained eye says, hey, this is not exactly healthy. Just because you're used to it, or because you decided that you can survive or cope, so what? That just means that a person has learned to survive under all circumstances. And Harayas Hanailed again, if you see the results, a little time, something may give. So where's the rhythm in this week's chapter? Right at the outset, it starts off and says that God spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai, speak to the people, the Jews, and say that when you will come into this land that I give you, V'shavsa Ora Shabbos Lashem, you shall rest the land for a Sabbath unto God. You shall rest the land. This is the mitzvah it's called Shemitah, the sabbatical. That every seventh year in a cycle, hence the rhythm, from the beginning of time, there's a cycle, and it continues. Here's how the cycle begins. It begins right away with a purpose. Remember that you shall rest the land, you shall sanctify it. And the cycle begins, Sheishanim Tizru Sadecha, 6 years you shall sow, plant your fields, your land, V'Sheishanim Tizmar Karmecha, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyards, V'Asaftas Tfuasa, and gather its produce, its fruits. And then in the seventh year, I'm reading Shabbos Shabbosin Hashem. It's a double Shabbos, it says. Should be a Sabbath of Sabbaths to God for this land, Shabbos Lashem. And that year you should not sow your fields and land and not prune your vineyards. That's essentially the mitzvah of Shemitah. Today, we don't keep Shemitah except in Israel, because this is all relevant. Well, it's always been that way, not just today. Today, Shemitah is kept every seventh year. The next Shemitah year would be, what would be the next Shemitah year? It would be in 3 years from now, I think, right? Yeah. So we're now in I'm just thinking when was the last Shemitah year was, Mandalad was one, and yeah. Yeah, the last one was in 2008. It was a Shemitah year. So we're basically 3 years into one, so 4 years from now. So the seventh sabbatical, in Israel there's a whole series of laws of what we have to, fields should not be sowed, how you buy produce. It's a whole business. The meaning behind this mitzvah is, as the Sefer HaChinuch writes, he writes that one of the reasons he gives is that it's about remembering who owns this world. The tendency is when you are successful, you're immersed in your work and in sowing your fields, and this of course applies on a broad sense to everything we do, we can convince ourselves, we can convince ourselves we're self-made. My successes are my own. So every seventh year you're reminded, this year remember that the land belongs not to you, it's God's land. And it's God's blessings that brought you the produce. So every seventh year we rest, similar to the Shabbos of the week. That after 6 days of the week you remember that there's a higher purpose. And it's not all about your achievements and your accomplishments. Yet it's 6 days, which is the majority of the time we are immersed in that work. But 1 day a week we remind ourselves of the means and what is the mean and what is the end. But above all, it's about a rhythm. It's about a rhythm, which we all mind you, apply. Not necessarily always in a healthy way. You know, even a workaholic at some point has to rest. Different societies and different times of history, the concept of rhythm was understood differently. You know, today, in the Western world at least, in America, New York, obviously, maybe more extreme, there's a certain accepted norm that there are 5 work days. And then there's Saturday and there's Sunday. There is a work day consists of the average 8 hours, 9 to 5. And I'm not saying everybody, but that's that you eat 3 times a day, 3 meals. So in any work environment, there's time breakfast. It's usually before you go to work, but there's lunch hour, coffee breaks, tea breaks, and stuff like that. And if you think about it, yes, there's a rhythm. I'm not suggesting this is etched in stone as the only healthy rhythm, but that's the rhythm here. In Europe, there's the main meal is the afternoon meal, lunch. And those become less popular, but some countries, actually for a few hours, take off in the middle of the day and rest. I remember the first time I saw it was in Israel when I was a kid. I'm still a kid, I think, but a younger kid. And it was like, interesting, middle of the day, suddenly everything stops, stores close, everybody's going home for a nap or whatever it is. And that's when they eat the heavier meal, as opposed to in the evening, night. In the United States, it's the opposite. But the point, all I'm saying is I'm not going to start making a case which one is right, because to me they're all man-made conventions, and maybe they all have something you can learn from. Remember, if you really want to be historical about it, there was once a time where work altogether was seen as the domain for the inferior. In the times of the great Greeks and Aristotle, work was for the labor, was for the servants. The people aspire to is to be philosophers, thinkers, think about the bigger purpose of life, and have others do their menial labor like tailor, shoemaker, water carriers, and so on. Today, especially in the Western world, work has become idealized. What was once a curse is today, a career. You don't have a career, you're considered some inferior creature. So both extremes obviously are not healthy. But you see rhythms. And here's the Torah rhythm that God put into place, which is maybe where it all originates from. That 6 days you shall work, 6 years you shall work, and then there's the sabbatical. But it's not just about taking off. It's more importantly psychologically the rhythm. Where do you invest and where do you put all your eggs in what baskets? You realize that you have 2 baskets here. One is where you invest your energies. 6 years you plant, you sow, you prune. And then there is understanding the purpose of it all. And that's not an easy thing in our day and age, because of money pressures and because of social pressure and because of the need to survive, work. The 6 years have become complete dominant and the 7th is almost gone. There was once an expression in some holy books, that more than Jews kept the Shabbos kept the Jews. So more than you do for Shabbos, Shabbos does for you. What does that mean? Simple words. That the human psyche requires an ability to rise above material activities. It's necessary, not optional. Though you can get away without it, doesn't mean that it's healthy. It just means you're able to compensate. So there's a healthy element. As a matter of fact, one of the things the Chinuch also writes about the sabbatical, about the Shemitah, and I've never checked it out in science, says that actually resting the field in a strange way also has an ability to regenerate it. Which makes sense, the idea of on a human level for sure makes sense. If you're working very hard, it's not just about, you see even with athletes, there's a need to cool down. There's a need to warm-up exercises. There's a need to slow down before you're really going to go into something that's a very heavy work. So it's not just about gathering strength. There's also an element that is necessary even in the physiological level of things. So there's a rhythm. And what does that teach us about things? There's also a rhythm to history, and there's a rhythm to understanding upheavals. Those that are not afraid of the future are the people who have mastered the art of the rhythm. What does that mean? Not they've mastered and they know exactly how things are going to go, but they know that there has to be a rhythm and there has to be cycles. There's take an example. What is a good swimmer like? How would you define a good swimmer? You could say a good swimmer obviously knows how to swim. That goes without saying. But what really the art of swimming? It's not only knowing when to swim, it's knowing when not to swim. If a storm strikes and a good swimmer is stuck somewhere in the water and there are heavy waves, so a novice who doesn't understand how fast our energy can be drained would fight. A good swimmer knows when to stop and let yourself be carried, not to fight, gather your strength, pick your battle, so to speak. In other words, the good swimmer is the good navigator, not only the art of purely swimming. The same is true in communication and in teaching, something that is not always appreciated. There's an expression in the Talmud, "Megal tefach mechasat v'chaim." You reveal 1 inch and you conceal 2. The greatest teachers are the people who you learn more from what they conceal than what they tell you. Not conceal as in a secret or like withholding it, but what they don't say. Because a good teacher is educating people in methodology, how to learn to grow on their own. So there's what the person says and there's what they don't say. Sometimes you discover years later that a teacher knew the answer and they didn't tell it to you. Not because they were trying to be cruel or withholding, but because it was important for you to learn how to walk on your own. And it gets, of course, more complicated than that. Of course. The idea of between the lines. There's something to be said, and there are things that should not be said. A person may not be ready for it. The person has to learn it on their own. So in the process of navigation on every level, whether it's communication, teaching, studying, and learning, it says when Moses, the beginning of this book of Vayikra, talks about the spaces in the Sefer Torah scroll between sections and chapters. So it says the great Moses was learning with the great God, the Torah, so God would pause between parsha to parsha, between one chapter and the next, in order for Moses to reflect. You could say, well, Moses was such a great student, why couldn't he just continue? But remember, God is also a great teacher, so everything's relative. Because everybody needs rotzeh and shuv. Everyone needs a rhythm. When to go and when to pause. And even though this sounds so simple, but the biggest mistakes most of us make is a result of our not accepting and not knowing how to align ourselves with the rhythms, fighting them. Fighting when you should be just staying back and letting yourself be float, or floating when you should be swimming, when you should be moving forward. It's a common mistake. And it's not, I'm not saying it necessarily to criticize us, because we may not understand ourselves what these rhythms are. There's a custom that under a chuppah, at the end of the ceremony, wedding ceremony, a glass is broken. And then everyone yells out Mazel Tov. Which maybe is the root of the custom that our grandmothers all taught us, that every time we were kids, we broke glasses, they would say Mazel Tov. But the point is, why do you break a glass at the end of a wedding ceremony? First of all, breaking anything is always a sign of it doesn't seem like it's complete or whole. So one of the reasons is it reminds us of the destruction of the temple. The big question is, why, of all things, of all times rather, the highest point in two people's lives? There'll be plenty of fireworks coming in any relationship. Why do they have to suddenly remember destruction just right at the end of the ceremony? That's usually a time where there's a little harmony between the spouses. Why do you have to remember it? And one of the answers is a very simple but deeply psychological answer, which also connects to what the Talmud says, also a very weird, paradoxical, contradictory statement. It says that Moses designated, just as there are 7 days that we sit Shiva when we grieve and mourn over a person who's died, passed away, so too did he designate 7 days of Mishnah, of celebration after a wedding ceremony. I mean, how do you equate these two? We all don't know that there's death and there's life, but why put it in one sentence, in one breath, and equate them, saying just like that, just like this? There's a similar statement in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, that says, just as we diminish in joy when we enter the sad month of Av. We increase in joy when we enter the happy month of Adar. Why the need to put these together? You know, a person is celebrating. Let them celebrate. Why do you have to remind them? We all will be reminded, unfortunately, of some sad things. Do we have to remember right at the high point of our lives? Let it just be. But you see it consistently. And the answer is an unbelievable answer, in my opinion at least. And that is because this is the secret of rhythm. It's the secret also of humility. It's recognizing that even at your high point, don't forget, a heart has to go like that. The wave goes like that. It's not just high points. And simply speaking, it means that when you are in your highest point in your life, the highest moment of joy, and you remember for a moment, it doesn't take away from your joy. You remember that there are some people in this world that are not so joyous tonight, that are broken. And you remember that there's a destruction that has affected many. That is a sign of real humility. It means you're not so all consumed with your joy. You're totally justified to be consumed. But you make a pause and remember not everybody is there yet. What does that do? It creates a level of subtlety, a level of, the word I wanted, humility, but modesty. That, God forbid, the day will come, if there should be such a day, when you are saddened by something, when you grieve. It also won't be complete, because you'll remember then that there's another side to the rhythm. The up, the mountain, the peaks. And you'll see anyone who's completely consumed with themselves, almost to the point of narcissism, in whatever it is they're doing, even if it's justified, completely consumed, with no room for anything but themselves, when they go to the other extreme, they're also completely consumed. So anyone that's 100% consumed with their personal joy, doesn't leave one room for anyone, doesn't leave one space for another person, when they, God forbid, grieve, will also be completely consumed. Because there's no release, there's no humility. Now, I'm not suggesting that it's arrogant, I'm just saying on a subtle level, something is lacking. So it's a rhythm, it's all about rhythm, and that's what the Talmud and Moses equates it to. It's not trying to say, don't be so happy because one day you're going to grieve. It just says, remember there's a rhythm, there's a cycle. It's a cycle to life. And remember that you're part of it. It's the people who understand that can navigate through anything. Again, it doesn't mean they can predict. They can navigate. Like the good swimmer cannot predict what kind of waters are coming up ahead, but he's confident, he or she is confident that whatever comes, I can manage it because I have the experience. And I know that if it's a storm, I will slow down and let it carry me. And if it's the other way around, if it's calm, I'll forward thrust and propel myself forward. That's what a good swimmer is about, learning how to navigate. When Viktor Frankl analyzes his Holocaust survivors, people who he witnessed in the concentration camps, and he developed his logotherapy of meaning with the statement that it was only the people who really understood that their lives have meaning and purpose who were able to really navigate through it all. Not because they suffered less, not because they were less sensitive to death, is because they understood the meaning was the deeper purpose of things. They understood that they surrendered somewhat to the rhythm. Someone who's completely control freak and thinks I have it all figured out and then realize they don't, that can be very devastating. It's almost like knowing even in the moments of highest success that there's a blessing. It's not easy because when things are going well, we usually forget. So that's what this chapter tells us, the teaching of the rhythm. So now looking at the world events today, some of them, as I said, are very unpredictable. It's probably easiest to just ignore most of it, because that way you don't have to worry about where this is all headed. As people worried about Israel, worried about the Middle East, how it's going to affect us. What happens if Saudi Arabia suddenly goes up in flames? What will happen then with the whole oil thing? There's a lot of things you can worry about. And I know people personally who call me or talk to me, email me, that are terrified. They start thinking about reality, they're just terrified. And then when you start thinking about terror attacks, you start dreaming about them, it becomes very difficult. There's that they joke to tell about this guy who wakes up in a heavy sweat in the middle of the night. He's like trembling, and his wife asks him, "What happened?" He said, "I had a terrible dream." "What did you dream about?" He says, "I dreamed that God died." She says, "Well, stop thinking about stupid things. Go back to sleep." Anyway, he goes back to sleep. A little while passes. He's up again, even a bigger sweat. And he dreamt again that God died. So she says to him, if you wouldn't think about God by day, you wouldn't dream about him by night. Because the Talmud says, what you dream by night is what you think about by day. So his classic response was, "I haven't thought about God for 30 years. One of these jokes they tell. What does that mean? That maybe the best is not to think about all these things, so that way you don't dream, and that way you're going to complete denial. Now, if a person is wired that way or chooses that path, that's their business. Unfortunately, most of us are addicted to the media and to the news, which is like basically a 24/7 diet of constant breaking news, which, once upon a time we were pretty good in control of our lives with all the breaking news. But here, every second, every breakthrough, we're right on top of it. Cameras everywhere. Every time there's a little fire somewhere, I'm not saying it's not newsworthy, it's all over the place. And you can especially see the slow news days on cable TV, and they really focus on all kinds of ridiculous breaking news everywhere. And of course, I remember my father was a journalist, and I remember asking him as a kid, I said to him, "So what do you do one day if there's no news? What would you do?" So my father, in his classic way, said to me, "That would be the headline, that today there was no news." That was a joke. Obviously, the answer as you get a little older is realize there's always news. Well, or maybe there's never news. Who knows? What is news? The moments, as I said, or the bigger picture? So when you look at the events that are unfolding now, and the only way really to understand them is in the context of rhythm. If you try to understand them in particle fashion, you're probably familiar, some of you, with quantum mechanics. So quantum mechanics has discovered the big question whether light is a wave or a particle, that it's both. And based on certain subatomic quantum rules, it depends who's measuring and when you measure and so on. And there are things that can have both properties. The difference between a particle and a wave is the difference between rhythm and moments. Is your life a series of many moments, or is it a rhythm? Whether you know what it is or not. We live our mentality, and maybe it's the easier way, is we live in moments. Like particles. Here's a piece, here's a piece, here's a piece, here's a piece. In retrospect, you can go back and connect some dots and say, now I understand the pattern. But we don't live our lives ahead of tomorrow and the next day in a rhythmic way. We live pieces, fragments. If you have a plan for your life, so the fragments have some type of organization. But it's a fundamentally different mentality than when you think in a rhythm form. In a rhythm form, waves don't work like particles. Waves are not made up of pieces. Waves are one flow, and there's just different stages of that flow where you're at. The fact that you don't know what's coming in a moment doesn't mean that there isn't a flow. But I tend to believe, and maybe this is my theory, the reason we like to live particle fashion, because it gives us the illusion of control. A particle you can put into your pocket, and I have it now. I own it. I put it on my shelf. Here it is. I have my to-do list, etc. A rhythm you can't control. A rhythm means it's endless. But imagine, God forbid, if your heartbeat was like particles. It contracts, expands, and it's all disconnected. That wouldn't be very good. The beauty of it is that it's a wave. When you look at the cardiogram, going back to that, it's constantly flowing. It's just different stages of the wave. But it's one long wave from the beginning to end. That's how you'd like to live your life, that your heart did not stop for a second. It just went through different stages. Same thing with our breathing. Look at anything healthy, you'll see it's completely wave-like, not particle-like. But as a result of our own misalignment, one of the two, misalignment, let's ask an auto mechanic, misalignment, okay. As I said, we need adjustments all the time, misalignment, and which often creates a sense of insecurity. You need to hold on to something. Since I'm using swimming as a metaphor, let's take this metaphor all the way. God forbid, what does a person who's drowning and can't swim do? They grab onto whatever is there. And they'll grab onto a lifeguard or someone who can swim and can often drown them both because you get so desperate and so powerful. Why? Because when a person doesn't know how to swim, they grab on to an object. They don't understand that swimming is about going with the rhythm. You know, a good swimmer won't panic if there's a storm. They'll figure out how to navigate. I'm not just suggesting that you can navigate everything. There are storms that are impossible to navigate. A bad swimmer or a person who doesn't know how to swim doesn't understand. They just think they'll grab something or they'll do something. You do everything counterintuitive. Like when they teach you how to drive, and I always think how do people manage it, but you manage it when you know how to drive. And when you get into a skid on ice, you should never do what you instinctively want to do, which is press the brakes. You have to like almost do the opposite of what your inclination is, like turn into the skid. You know, the first time it happens, it's quite terrifying, and you do everything wrong. But then you get a little more presence of mind. You could more or less navigate. Again, God forbid, no one should know of these situations. But the point is, there are many, many things in life that way. I remember once reading, I didn't look, I've looked for it, about how they weave silk from silkworms. You know, natural silk. So there's a whole process. It's very complicated because, first of all, silk is extremely delicate and so easy to tear. And if you want to really what you want to extract the silk, you need to do it very, very gently. And it's literally counterintuitive. It's like we all do. What do you do when you get all frustrated with the tangled wires? You start pulling from every place and you think it's just tear apart. Or tangled hair, etc. I don't have that problem. So, because you know, you just, so on. But sometimes it's the art of subtlety that's required. It's like the ice skate on ice. It's the subtlety. Not dug in too deep. You have to know how to like glide. And the silkworm, there's a whole art that takes years to master of how they extract the silk. It's precisely not by pulling. It's almost like letting go, and then it allows you to releases. And that requires discipline. You know, there are different things that we do often. We try to be aggressive, and it just doesn't work. There are many, many examples of this. Of course, psychologically, when you speak to people, and so on. But it's all about a rhythm and being able to exercise restraint. Have you ever tried it out? Like, let's say you meet somebody, you're sitting with someone, they drive you crazy. You want to wring their neck. You know, whatever it is, they're blocked, or they say things that are. And often you do wring their neck. But what about when you try the other way? Restraint. You know, really maturely stopping yourself. There's a certain power to that. And you feel it later. Like it's not just pride. The sense of understanding that restraint can often get more than you want than the other way around. Obviously, part of rhythm is knowing when to exercise restraint and when not to. Then it's not a black and white type of thing. So to go back to the picture of history, Kierkegaard wrote that we could only understand our lives backwards, but we have to live our lives frontward. We humans have adjusted ourselves due to misalignments and primarily due to insecurity. That you have to grab onto something to hold for your security, and it's exactly opposite of what really works. Hoarding and holding on to something when you're drowning is just pushing over the inevitable. And we stop ourselves from really appreciating the rhythm of life. When a person is feeling very depressed or dark, things don't seem to be working, the hardest challenge is how to teach that, to give that person confidence that they should know that this is not their final resting place. Because that's what happens. Everything closes in on you. And you say, it's impossible. I can't get out of this. That's part of the demoralization that comes from any real pain. Those that enter that pain with a certain sense of rhythm and meaning, as I said before, transcendence, so then, even in the dark moment, they may not understand it, but they know somewhere deep down that there's a rhythm here too. It doesn't justify it, it doesn't the pain, it doesn't make it less. It just means you're not the end of your rope. And you'll see people going through the same challenges, sometimes one worse than another, and one person can't handle it and another person can. That resilience comes from the rhythm that I'm describing. So when you look at events, and remember, we're addicted to the analysis of the pundits and the bloggers and the commentators and all these experts who tend to focus completely on the moment. I mean, just look at the bin Laden story, the details as they're being leaked. I'm not saying every detail is insignificant, but it's like so, this insulting our intelligence in the sense of this voyeurism. It's nice to know that bin Laden dyed his hair, part of a propaganda campaign to deify him in the eyes of those that worshipped him. But the way things become breaking down, I remember when Michael Jackson died. Remember that now, hours and hours and hours, the doctors they marched on, the plastic surgeons, like to the point of obscenity. This consumption of Americans, People magazine consumption. We need to know every detail. And I can't say I'm not guilty of sometimes having that voyeurism myself. I mean, I really don't really have a chance of time. I watch it. But that's how it is. We're consumed with these images. A celebrity were to walk into this room now, I don't know how much you'd be listening to what I have to say. Okay? That's how it is. What is it about it? I don't know. Someone has face recognition, name recognition. Is it our own search for recognition? Is it our own search for significance? Is it the way we play out our lives through movie stars and athletes and so on? I mean, the analysis can go on and on. The point I want to make is, don't underestimate our addiction to this. It's unbelievable addiction. And in a strange way, it's maybe one of the worst because it's innocuous. It's not an addiction like a drug or alcohol or gambling or some other addiction that has direct impact on your health and self-control and so on. This is an addiction that's it's like innocent almost. It's a big thing. But I'll tell you what it does. It takes you out of the rhythm of life and turns you into a particle-driven person. Everything's about events, moments. I've seen people at peace with themselves. They did not need to be anticipating a party at the weekend for them to be happy. Many of us, because our lives are not so happy, we wait for those moments. Oh, there's a party coming up in 3 years, so I'm going to have a happy day or a distracting day. I mean, I might be exaggerating the point, but you get that. I think it has a lot to do with, obviously, our focus and obsession with materialism is all particle-oriented. And that idea of, like a fish in the sea, swimming through the rhythms, through the waters, through the waves, is not something we're really trained to do. Young children are all rhythmic. But as adults start creating superimposed routines, man-made routines. Do this, don't do that. I'm not suggesting there shouldn't be discipline. But basically, we kill the spontaneity in children's lives at some point. And spontaneity is seen almost like dangerous. And someone spontaneous. And then when you meet someone that's spontaneous, it's very refreshing. Wow, that's a guy, an exciting person. Not everything's predictable. But it's in somewhat danger. Why? Because in an insecure world, spontaneity is dangerous. Spontaneity for people who've been hurt and abused is maybe a predator on the prowl. Danger lurking. So in return, to compensate, we need control. We need to know where we are, exactly what, when. So there's the hyper-alertness that we have as a result of all of this. And this has absolute impact on the events that are happening now in the world. So to look at them for a moment in the rhythmic type of way, the difference between, let's say, looking at the upheavals in the Middle East, particle perspective and wave perspective. In a particle perspective, it's about how fast our oil price is going to rise, and airline tickets. It's about whether we are going to be in immediate danger of any of these upheavals. It's about Middle East and Israel, of course. And all legitimate concerns, mind you. I'm not suggesting these are illusions. But that becomes the focus. And that becomes what we address. A rhythmic perspective on it, which doesn't, by the way, contradict the particle one, creates a whole different reality. The Ottoman Empire fell 100 years ago. And at that time, the Arab world did not have any oil. It was discovered in the 20s. Interestingly, as soon as the Ottoman Empire fell, Well, it was discovered actually is almost the same, not in the 20s, in the teens of the 20th century. And as a result, if you think about it, there's a whole pattern. What happened in the Middle East the last 100 years? For that matter, the last 500 years. And what's happened with Christianity and the battles of religion and science that consumed Europe a few hundred years ago. You look at it all that way, you can literally see a pattern. I talked about Shabbos, the Shemitah, for example. If the purpose of existence is resting and connecting to God, so we should have 6 days of the week Shabbos, and 1 day of the week we work. Or 6 years sabbaticals, and 1 year we toil the fields. That would be fun. But the answer is no. God did not create the universe for us to escape material life. He wants us to enter this material world with all its challenges, and there learn to sanctify it. So the purpose of existence is 6 weeks, or the 6 years, the 6 days. But then there's 1 day or 1 year that elevates it. What do you think is going on here, the battle between religion and faith and modern world? Even what bin Laden represented, the clash of civilizations, the Western world. What are you doing with us in the Muslim? What are you defiling our Muslim world? Attacking the Western decadent infidels. This is very similar to the passions of fires of religion that consumed and terrorized the world for hundreds and hundreds of years. Whether it was called Inquisition or pogroms or the church's persecution of scientists. The story of Galileo when he proclaimed this thing, the church forced him to recant because it contradicted church doctrine. I mean, all this is about an imbalance between faith in God and coexisting with that faith in this world. It's an imbalance between the 6 years of being involved in mundane work and the Shabbos. Too much Shabbos is destructive. Too much materialism is also destructive. That's called rhythm, finding the right balance. It says in the Sifri, in the Medrash, that somebody, just like there's a mitzvah to rest on Shabbos, it's also a mitzvah to work 6 days of the week. So there's some people who maybe don't keep the Shabbos mitzvah, and there's some people who don't keep the other one. You need both. God puts you in this world, He wants you to work, He wants you to toil. Adam l'amel yavalad, a person was created to produce. But production is a means to a higher end. So when you look at events in the world with this type of rhythmic lens, number one is everything becomes less extreme, becomes less, sharp, less sharp, dulled in a way, because it's a rhythm. This doesn't mean there is no danger lurking, and this doesn't mean we shouldn't be vigilant and be careful. But it means there's a picture emerging, and the picture that it's emerging is one that's making its peace with God. The Middle East will go through its market correction, reality check, hopefully with the least amount of pain. And that's also up to us how fast we learn from the experience. But it's a rhythm of history. The rhythm is that this material world has to be coexisting with faith and the divine. And the same is true with events, even events like tsunamis and other natural disasters that the insurance company call acts of God. So it's true we can't control these events, and we also cannot minimize the deaths that they cause. And I'm not justifying them in some way, but to say that because they happen we all lay down and die, that's also not the case. There is a rhythm, there is a balance, and we learn to pick ourselves up and move forward. There will be people, you read about the depression, people who committed suicide because they became financially ruined. And also recently, it disturbs us all, but it's even worse than that, because you start thinking money was enough reason for a person to decide to take their life, that money was worth more than their lives. It's not natural. We usually, we'll do everything to spend all our money to save our lives, medicine-wise and so on. Which billionaire would not spend money to save his life and say, I need the money more than my life? But here, for some reason, money, pride, reputation, so I understand they're all deep things. But it's something really distorted. I'm not judging anyone in that situation. Get desperate You do acts that you may regret later, or maybe you saw it as an option, God forbid, people suicidal in families and stuff like that. But you see a major distortion. It's just not natural. Nobody would do that. Now, I'm using an extreme example, but it just shows you that this is not rhythmic living. There's no balance. One of the beautiful things I mentioned very often, Abraham was an unbelievable philosopher. But with all his philosophy and his theology and his ideas and his faith, he knew the key secret to the future was building a family in the spirit of his legacy. And that was his commitment, L'man Asher Yitzaveh, that he committed to building a family that would perpetuate his legacy. Now you may think that's like, not what's so brilliant about that. Everyone understands that. Yeah, show me another person in history that did that. Aristotle was a brilliant man, no one denies. Socrates, Plato, all the great thinkers and writers those periods. How come none of them left children and grandchildren that perpetuated their ideas? Was it that they didn't value that? Was it became they so involved with their own philosophies they forgot about their families? Did they not value the need to perpetuate? In many ways to understand it, but they are living in the moment. Maybe it was their own self-worship. Maybe it was ego. You become a great philosopher. The world needs your philosophy. There's no time for children. So the brilliance of an Abraham, the humility to be both a great thinker and understand, don't live for the moment, there's generations to come, is not such a simple matter. Not many have mastered that art. That's called rhythm. That's someone who understands history as a continuum, like a marathon, that each generation carries the baton and continues what happened before. Midgets that stand on the shoulders of giants. That we are a process as opposed to an event. Even redemption, Geula in Jewish thought, is a process. It concludes with an event, but it's a process that began at the beginning of time, that every good deed that a human being does lasts forever, never dies. And when that all accumulates, it changes the world. This too, you may think is so obvious. It's not obvious. This is not the way most people thought. Some authors attribute this concept to Jews. The Jews understood history as a process. It was not common understanding, because if it was, all those empires would have thought about the process. How come they didn't think about it? How come they self-destructed? Were you the one that also said misalignment? Disalignment? Oh, okay. Good. We have the vocabulary committee in information. I appreciate it. You learn, I'd rather learn on the job. So what is it that they didn't get? They didn't get was, yes, their successes. Just like here, for 6 years, they didn't know how to keep Shabbos. They didn't know how to pause. Their successes completely overwhelmed them. And they thought that what I'm doing now is more important than ever anything. And then it all ends. It is only those that hold on to that type of vision that allow themselves to see a rhythm of history. Now, for us to see it is in a way not such a big thing as for Abraham. Imagine Abraham is in the beginning of time. How did he know what's going to unfold? So that's pretty amazing. A pioneer should think like that. The first one to think in terms of a rhythm, a flow. And it says God tells Abraham in his promise to him. You look in the chapter in Genesis, Lech Lecha, the Bris Ben Absarim, the covenant between the parts where God makes his covenant with Abraham. He says to him, your children, your descendants will be strangers in a strange land, and they will suffer at the hands of a foreign country, referring to Egypt, for 400 years. But then they will leave with great wealth. There you got the story of rhythm. There's the up, there's a down. There's a down and there's an up. Abraham knew it, taught it to his children, but not just taught it as an idea, it was in their gut. When you think about Jewish humor, for example, and there's so many books and analysis of Jewish humor. The modern sitcom is very much, they say, a result of Jewish humor. Jewish humor has two sides to it. It's tragic and it's hilarious. How could you laugh at tragedy? Because you understand rhythm. The expressions like, again, going back to my grandmother, my mother, an expression in Yiddish is just, you think about it. So, you have, let's say, a whole family, a bunch of kids, and they're making a racket, and children start making a racket, and they're throwing upside down the whole house. And you think, when you think it's like, can't get worse, one child wakes up, comes down the steps. So what does a grandmother say when she sees that? So most of us would say, oh no, She says, Nocha Tog Yontif, another day of the holiday. That's what she says. Which, on one hand means, another problem, but she calls it a day of the holiday. Nocha Tog Yontif. A holiday is a great thing. But it's like another day of holiday that you have to deal with and cook and so on. Or I mentioned earlier, saying Mazel Tov when you break a glass. These aren't just cute expressions, and you don't want to say something negative. It's like understanding that life is more complicated. It blunts the edges, so to speak. Like this too shall pass. We shall overcome. I don't want to use that one, but why not? This too shall pass. And this does not mean that you diminish your investment and seriousness about your life. It just means that everything has another dimension to it. It's like that deeper understanding that with every agony there's ecstasy. I said before about breaking the glass, there's another reason we break. Because everything that is complete, interestingly, is not how we'd understand complete. Everything that's complete has everything within it. Everything that's whole has both sides to it. It makes you laugh and it makes you cry. When you love someone, not only do they fill your heart, they also break your heart. And I don't mean break your heart necessarily in a bad way because they leave or they're not there or you're insecure. They break your heart because you are so vulnerable and so close. It breaks your heart. Sometimes you could love someone and just start crying just from that love. Real things are real on many levels. So when you're standing at a chuppah, the second reason that I'm giving here is, and the moment of joy, it's not like you want to break something, it's just that you are complete. And complete carries everything within it. So on a particle perspective, a particle world sees love as very linear. I love you, I feel great about it. And if I feel sad for a moment, that's not good. A rhythmic person says love comes with two sides. It's always going to be two parts to it. Someone that can make you so happy could also make you sad. It's not that you celebrate the sadness, but it means there's a full picture here. You stand, it says, some say, why did the temple have to be destroyed? Because when people were coming to it, they were only celebrating. They forgot that the temple should break their hearts. They lost humility. They were basking in the glory of God. That's great. They forgot you have to also cry. And again, not cry out of sadness. Cry out of awe. You're in a place of such holiness. Cry that you have been blessed. You can't be so only filled with it. You have to also let it break your heart. They say there's nothing as crooked as a straight ladder. And there's nothing as what's the expression they use? There's nothing as saying in Yiddish. Now that's the last one. I'm going to get to that. As I say, nothing. It's a Yiddish expression. There's nothing as crooked as a straight ladder. There's nothing as straight as there's nothing as straight as a crooked ladder. That's how it goes. There's nothing as crooked as a straight lie, a white lie, and there's nothing as complete as a broken heart. It's an expression. A heart, by definition, for a person that's secure, not a person who's afraid. A person who's secure with love. Vulnerability is not a liability. It's not nothing to fear. They can celebrate it because they're secure, because I exist. I'm not afraid something's going to take away. Someone who grew up, let's say, in an insecure environment where love was a luxury, if at all, and you didn't know whether it's coming to you, or sometimes the person who gave it to you also gave you great pain. A person like that holds on for the desperate, for their lives, for every drop of love they will get, to the point of being unhealthy. They're desperate and needy. A person who feels that self-love within and generates it, that will not think like a particle type of love, will have a certain sense. Sometimes you don't get always what you want. That doesn't mean you're going to disappear. You hear it from many people who go through healing and they say, I could not allow anyone into my life and to love because I was afraid if I would be hurt, I would disappear. And then with time I learned that I don't disappear just because I'm hurt. For some of us that doesn't make sense. If you feel that way, you're probably secure. But if you're not, it's very natural. You feel you'll disappear. You feel, because what else do I have? I have what I can get. I don't deserve more. You don't feel you deserve more, so what you have, it's like, again, particle. It's not like a fish in water, the rhythm. Children by nature deserve and get, and in a healthy environment will get love. And that forever gives them the security that no one can give you anything because they didn't take it from you. The type of dignity and value that you get, God gave you life, and therefore dignity, and gave you meaning and significance. Nobody can take it away from you because they didn't give it to you. Your parents can't take it from you because they didn't give it to you. But that takes sometimes a lot of work for someone who doesn't feel that as a given. And we turn into particle type of lives. The symptoms are very obvious. You run from place to place. Commitment doesn't come easy. You're always in control, or so it seems. You always need exit strategy. You're always, you're jumping from island to island because that's your oasis. The rhythm person allows things to travel through you. I think Robert Frost was the one that said, I think he's talking about pain. He says the only way out is through. But we don't like that. We'd rather get out without going through. So you find a back door. But the only way out is through. You're going to have to go through it. And then you learn you don't die. You don't just shrivel up and disappear. But it takes work. It takes confidence. It takes people around you that believe in you. It also takes not feeding yourselves with toxic people who don't believe in you and just feed off of you, also like particles, feeding off of particles. The blind leading the blind. It takes a lot of work to create an environment. But it's also knowing very clearly that life is a rhythm. And it's interesting, of all the nations, the only one that appreciated rhythm, starting from Abraham, are here today. And all the rest, I don't care how powerful their particles were, they did not have a wave. And therefore nothing lasted. Yeah, we have their ruins, we have some of their relics, we have some books, but you don't have a people. You don't have a culture. You don't have a living, dynamic force in history. You have a piece of history somewhere. It's a piece. I often think when you think of the pyramids in Egypt, they so worshipped life, or death you can say, that the pharaohs wanted to immortalize themselves. The way it was to do was to build a pyramid, a sphinx, and bury alive, they say, some of their soulmates. Very loving. They tried to freeze themselves in time. Instead, they created a shrine of death. They didn't leave anything beyond them. If they really wanted to freeze themselves in time, they should have studied one Talmudic statement that tells you the answer to it all. It says, Yaakov Avinu in the Torah, the only man doesn't say death. Yaakov Avinu le mes. When it says in the chapter of Vayechi, the end of Genesis, it doesn't say Vayomas Yaakov, that Jacob died. It says they mourned him, they grieved him, they embalmed him, they eulogized him, everything. But it doesn't say he died. So the Talmud says, why doesn't it? So it says, because he didn't die. The Talmud says, but they eulogized him, they buried him, they embalmed him, they did everything that you do to someone that died. The Talmud answers, Ma zare b'chaim, avhu b'chaim. Just as his children are alive, so too is he alive. Why didn't the pharaohs realize that if they leave children with their legacy, they would be alive through their children? They had to freeze themselves because it was about me, the particle, the ego. That was how they saw life. I wonder what kind of children they yielded, that that's the way they thought they would be immortalized. Only if I remain here. See, I said something wrong. The pharaohs are quaking. It's just a particle, okay. It's just water. They say tsunamis don't happen in the New York area, so don't worry. It's not a sign of anything coming. Even though I think Godzilla attacked New York, right? So the story goes. So, it's interesting, that Abraham, and then of course Moses and all the rest, they understood it's the wave, it's the rhythm. The children and the grandchildren. And it takes a lot, because these are great people, all the ones I mentioned. Thinkers, leaders. I'm not dismissing any of that. but they just didn't have that simple humility, or maybe that simple wisdom, chacham reyes hanela, to see the birthing. So I have no doubt as we enter into the 21st century, 11 years in, that as a Jew, as Jewish people, we have a lot to contribute in the rhythm of things and understanding the cycles. That means that we may not be able to predict the exact particles, what's happening tomorrow, the next day. There I rely on CNN, pundits, let them try to figure it out. And they won't figure it out anyway, so it doesn't matter. But there's a bigger picture. Where is the final destination? And the final destination, as the patterns in the past teach us, that there will be those that live particle lives and they will pass on and nothing will remain. And there are those that live rhythmic lives that will connect to some legacy and understand that we're part of history unfolding and that matter and spirit will converge. And even though I'm not using redemptive and messianic terminology, it's exactly what I'm referring to. A world where there will be ultimately real peace. And not because someone will dominate and everyone else will be subjugated, but because there will be an understanding, a mature understanding. Similar to how the United States, the founding fathers came to understand, with all their flaws, they came to understand a certain wisdom that no matter how right you think you are, if you don't respect that all people are created equal, and that the divine right that every person has to freedom of expression and so on, you're missing the boat. It took thousands of years for humans to come to institutionalize that in a constitution like the United States. And still we have many flaws in this country. And this country could also fall just like the Roman Empire fell. I'm not one of those that think, unless they hold on to that humble recognition. And I see no reason why they won't. But this is the same thing that the Arab world has to learn and the same thing that the entire world has to learn. Unfortunately, we don't have many leaders that I would call rhythm leaders, because politicians are also driven by the particle approach. I got to get myself reelected. I'll do whatever it takes now. And that's it. You have 4 more years, and then it's over. That's how everything is thought of. Everything begins and ends. There's no thinking of legacies. What do you mean? Maybe there's something that is a continuum here. The interesting thing they say about the United States as opposed to, let's say, the former Soviet Union, is that here leaders don't really change the course of the big picture, the rhythm of the United States. They can, of course, make major decisions and it has impact, but the country is more powerful than the leaders. Whereas in places like the Soviet Union, a leader can change everything. So there's a certain resilience to this country that has almost transcended its leaders, which is an interesting twist on things. Again, not to say that we don't get caught up and you'll have people arguing for thousands of hours and billions of dollars spent of these debates of who's going to win elections. As I get older, I've realized there's not that much difference between one and the next. I know this may not be popular in New York, but I'm not suggesting there isn't a difference between individuals and so on. But you see, start thinking, if you transcend your own personal feelings about the Democrats and Republicans and Bush and Obama, had Bush caught bin Laden 5 years ago in the same circumstances, trust me, he'd be bombasted by those that hate him. And those that don't like Obama will, it's a lot of personal and emotional stuff. But in the big picture of things, it's a lot less significant, in my personal view. Again, that doesn't mean moments don't matter, but in the big scheme of things, they matter less, let's put it that way. So, chill out. That's basically what we need to do. And when it comes down to it, I think that there are challenges, and we shouldn't be naive. Don't get me wrong, I don't think that we're living in a safe world. There's that many dangers lurking. And when, God forbid, someone's struck by this danger, you don't think in terms of rhythms. I understand that. But the big picture is still there, just because we don't always see it. Just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean no one wants to get me. You know that one. Just because we can't see the rhythms when we're suffering doesn't mean there are no rhythms. So it's a matter of really seeing the big picture before you have to deal with the details. And each piece is part of the puzzle. I hopefully will try to address some of it as I can understand it. The Middle East clashes, and I see it pretty clearly based on the similar wars in the house of Abraham and throughout history. It's very much similar pattern. Again, it doesn't play itself in the same out, maybe different characters, different countries, But there's a pattern. There has to be a pattern when you're dealing with such forces at work. And then there are other forces as well. Perhaps our biggest challenge, to sum up, for us, relevant to us, is our battle with materialism, the complacency and apathy to real spiritual values, because materialism is worshipped. Money, power, the here and now. The media, advertising, all feeds the particle lifestyle. Get it now. You're missing. Even our obsession with youth and with beauty, everyone should be beautiful, but not appreciating that aging is a process and you can't stop it. Just even seeing some people's faces at 80 years old, their face looks remade 1,000 times, and it's not consistent with the person. There's the obsession with the look. And again, I'm not judging anyone. Everyone should do whatever they think is for their vanity, but it's a different way of looking at life. We will age, and you can't stop that. And if you look at age as a liability, it's one thing, but if you look at age as aging wine and more experience, you want to also abort that process. In the Torah, there's great respect for the aged. Go to the sage and for counsel. We almost don't have that concept in our times. We look at the aged as people either who are just a burden on our economy, waiting to die, playing, like one guy told me, plays literally in Florida 6 days, talk about 6 years, 6 hours a day of golf, and then he goes watches his favorite shows and then goes out to dinner and so on. But he's a smart guy, and he's deteriorating. He said that's his culture. And he told me once, he says, my theory is the golf course is one step closer to the cemetery. They're very similar. They look long, flowing meadows and grass with little holes in the ground. That's the way he wants to put it to me. I wanted to cry. He's telling me what he's doing. He says, that's how it is. What is it? It was, I think, Mark Twain that wrote that he wants to live his last years in Manchester because it'll make the transition to death easier. That's what he writes. Now, I've been to Manchester. I know what he means. It is a little depressing there. So this is called a culture of death, waiting to die. And you've peaked. You're out. How much brain power, experience power lies in retirement villages of people who learned hard way, trial and error, that we don't access. That's an example where rhythm is completely ignored in face of the immediate particle. Money is very, very particle driven. It's how much you have right now, control, power, and so on. As I said again, I'm not suggesting the particle don't have its value, but it's completely distorted if you don't have the rhythm. So our challenge is how we look into our own lives and not be completely seduced, addicted to the particles, whatever they may be. To step back and understand there's a bigger picture. One of the saddest things that I deal with all the time, not the saddest per se in trauma value, in trauma they're sadder, but is this constant search of people, especially in New York, for their soulmate. The struggle to find your bashert, struggle to find the person you can love. And I see it as like a symptom of such disease in all our standards, because what do you think suffers most when there's no rhythm? As I said, it's children, family, your own love, because love is a completely rhythmic thing. Love is not a particle. Love is not a noun, it's a verb. I'm sorry, love is not a verb, it's a noun. That's a mistake. It's a noun, it's a state of being, it's not an act. Today love is seen, most people hear the word love, they think of it as a verb, making love. It's a verb, technique. Sexuality is action instead of a state of being. Intimacy is a state of being. You're in an intimate state. The Torah calls sexuality knowledge, to know someone. That's like rhythmic. It's not act-oriented. It's not action-oriented. And you see it affects tremendously, and it's like almost, I think to myself, I just started to think this, the forces that are feeding this continue to feed it, and I don't know how that ever can be resolved at the root. The only way is literally completely educating children in a new way, educating their whole sexual evolution as they grow into adults. Literally at the root. That's the only way in a real big sense. But then you have to deal with what you have, adults that have grown up in a society that has programmed them and trained them to think a certain way. And it affects issues like commitment. Why be committed? Commitment is like rhythm. Better to just, I get what I want and then I move on. or I don't move on, but it's all conditional. And it's a big challenge, and I really struggle with this all the time, case by case. You try to help people. You really want to do is you have to really basically deprogram people and try to pull them out of the matrix to start seeing things a little differently. But as we all know, it's not so easy to wean someone from a steady diet that makes them think a certain way. And I'm not suggesting I have it all worked out and I'm like the guy that's on top of the mountain figured out, but I think I see it. And seeing this is very sad. And the years roll on. We're just beginning to see the second generation of dysfunctionality emerging in the United States. Remember the 50s was still a pretty innocent baby boom age. We're now 50, 60, 70 years from World War II. So it's a whole new stage of things. It's also a rhythm, and it's interesting to see how it evolves. I mean, I predict, and I see it happening, there's going to be a backlash. When misery reaches a certain new bottom, there's always a backlash. And once there's a grassroots backlash, it has very big power. It's also part of the rhythm. I think some books document that in every historical process, there's 4 steps or 5 steps. First, a nation suffers terribly. People suffer terribly. They build a new nation. They peak economically and so on. Then, of course, they get corrupt. And then they fall and someone else comes into power and this process begins again. They say now we're at the end of the peak and so on. And this is pretty much documented in the cycle of history. You start desperate, United States, one's desperate, people are desperate. They build something, it takes growing pains. Then you appreciate your growth, but then you indulge in it, get corrupt, fall, and a new misery begins. And then a new growth, a new revolution against the old, etc., etc. So whether it happens faster now because of technology, we wait and see. So to conclude, let me say this. You have to have your Shabbos in place, because it will do for you more than what you do for it. Your sabbatical. We all have our 6 days, we have our 6 years, we have our immersion. But it's the Shabbos that creates the rhythm, that puts things into a cycle, where nothing becomes a force that consumes you completely. There's a cycle, and it continues to revolve. I just was thinking, I'll write about it probably. I'm just thinking about it. I don't know. It came up in the conversation that there are three options in your life. You can either devolve, revolve, or evolve. And it's something like those 3 types of people. People who make things happen, evolve. People who watch things happen, revolve. They're just watching things and they just stay where they are, but they see everything. And there are people who devolve. That's people who ask what happened. And life is a precipice. It's a mountain. Don't ever think it's a plateau. As I said with the swimming, you're either going up or you're going down. Just because you feel it or you don't feel it doesn't change the reality. So, being that I'm in the presence here of evolved kindred spirits and human beings, I want to say to you all and say to myself that it's an honor to be part of the process of human evolution, the progressive journey, the marathon. I feel personally proud to be able to talk about my great-grandfather Abraham, who saw as a pioneer a rhythm, to not get caught up in the passions and the minutia and the distractions of his time. And we're here today in an unbroken chain talking about it. So he must have done something right. And it was carried on. The question is what we will do. We have our own challenges. Thank God our challenges are not the ones of persecution. Today the challenges are we're too comfortable. We're easy. Life is easy. So we take it for granted. You don't feel a sense of urgency. So my role here as the head of the Meaningful Life Center is to create a sense of urgency in all of us, including myself. So please see me and everyone on our team here, Philip and Velvel, Daphne, as part of a circle of friends that can all help each other. And it's all the rhythm as well, give and take. Everybody contributes something, everybody takes, everybody gives in a certain way. And I want to say and announce as well that this class was dedicated, this workshop was dedicated in honor of Mark, our good friend Mark's grandfather's yahrzeit, Ben Sion, Ben Yitzchak, Isaac, and his sister's birthday. Bat Sion, Bat Asya, both on the 4th of Iyar. And, sorry? And may your father's neshama continues on through you, the rhythm, and you'll bring your neshamas into this world very soon. And your sister as well, on her birthday. And I will also say Philip will be giving his 7 p.m. tomorrow night class. Please speak to him. Philip is, I always describe him in the blue denim jacket and sweater and scarf. You can't see what color shirt, but the guy with the soy chips. Huh? Okay, that's Philip. Listen, this is for posterity. It's all being documented forever. So, I also will say, since we're talking about rhythm, we're in the 49 days of a rhythmic cycle between Passover and Shavuos. If any of you want to get that book called The Spiritual Guide to Counting the Omer, this week we brought a bunch here. And as well as if you haven't left your email address, please do so as well. So to keep the rhythm going. I'm connecting it all with rhythm. Do you notice? And any way that I could be of help to you, please don't hesitate. Feel free to call on me. It's a pleasure to be here, an honor to be here. We shall continue this rhythm as we have now for over 30 years next Wednesday night.
If we don't have your email, please leave your email outside of the
Right, absolutely. And stay in touch. Good night, everybody. Thank you.